All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 217 today. We are joined again by Laura Tabone, who runs the Megalith Hunter YouTube channel, and she's also got an awesome page on Instagram. I have both those links down below the video, so go check that out when you get a chance. Before we get started here, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/mindescapepodcast. For just $2 a month, you'll get exclusive guest episodes and segments. Just uploaded a bunch of stuff on there, some awesome stuff. Segment with Dr. Rick Strassman, segment with Laird Scranton, segment with Matthew Clark about the Eleusinian mysteries and entheogens. So go head on over there and check those out. And one more thing, head on over to indrasweb.org. This is a social media platform we created to connect open minds. So whether you want to speculate, hypothesize, theorize, or just anything having to do with the topics we discuss on this podcast, head on over there, set up a profile. We're still working on trying to get that in the App Store. And also, here is a picture of the Mind Escape t-shirt we are giving away at the end of October. So if you're interested in the giveaway, all you have to do is go to Apple Podcast, leave us a 5-star review, and take a screenshot of it, and then send it to mindescapepodcast@gmail.com. Or you can just go to our website at mindescapepodcast.com, and we'll enter for the giveaway. So, all right, welcome back on the show, Laura. This is part 2. Part 1, we kind of did a slideshow thing, we got a lot of good stuff in there, and you showed us around the island a little bit because you do live on Malta, which is awesome. So have you done anything recently since we did our episode? Like, have you hiked around or saw any different of the sites?
Hi, guys. Well, thanks for having me back on.
Absolutely.
Couldn't think of a better way to spend a Saturday night. I know last time we were in a bit of a hurry because I had something afterwards. So this time I think it's great just to chill. I have been hiking around a little bit. I'm still determined to find megaliths that no one has found before. And I got this fixation recently to have a look for the Cyclopean Wall that had been mentioned by Giorgio Grenier de Vassé. Now, he was an architect that had lived abroad. He was from Malta, and then he came back to Malta, and he was also an antiquarian and a classicist, and he became quite obsessed with the idea that the Plato's Atlantis was based on reality, and that it was based on Malta. And he did find some megalithic ruins. It was the time when Gigantia was first discovered. It was the time when Hazraim was first discovered. And he had drawn some pictures of a Cyclopean wall that he said was in the town of Mostar, which up until now hasn't got any references to megalithic remains. And if they did exist at that time, I mean, there were no other, I don't believe they were mentioned by any other antiquarians or any of the other people involved in excavations on Malta at the time. And they would probably have been destroyed by building work that's taken place in that area since then. But I thought, you never know. Why not? Let's just go for a hike and see what we can find in that area. So I wandered around, and I mean, I didn't find a Cyclopean wall, but I did find some megaliths in a field built into rubble walls, which are the modern farmer boundary walls. So often when they build rubble walls to demarcate their properties, they will use a megalith that's there. That does happen in other parts of the island, but those megaliths are recorded. And these ones, I couldn't find any reference to them. So I thought, oh my gosh, I found some megaliths that nobody's mentioned before. They're not mentioned in any of the old museum reports. They're not mentioned in any old excavation reports that I can find. Amazing. But then I did find a reference to them from about, 10 years ago, when the area was being earmarked for development, like a little bit to the south. People had actually, specialists had come there and had a look and recorded those megaliths. But I was impressed in the sense that I could recognize that they were just not random rocks. They were megaliths built into rubble walls, modern rubble walls. And also I was kind of excited because there hasn't been much hype around that. And that does mean that even though that guy was talking Cyclopean walls and Atlantis and whatnot, I mean, he did know what ruins look like. And so it's very possible that he did record actual ruins. And if there are ruins in that town as well, that's just another location where there were megaliths. probably temples as well. And that means it's like more than 60 locations that have been referenced in the past couple of hundred years, a good majority of which still have at least, a few blocks remaining. So imagine how many there were originally on an island of 300 and something square kilometers. That's crazy. So
are there still excavations from archaeologists and stuff going on today, or do they feel like they found most of what they're going to find?
I think, from what I know, the main ongoing excavations are at Roman sites. No, they do know that there are other sites that have not been excavated, but often that's because they're on private property, or probably they are leaving them for future generations. I mean, they're protected, though. They are protected megaliths. Like, there'll be a buffer zone around them, and
Right.
it cannot be developed or anything like that.
I mean, how does it work? Is the whole island a UNESCO site at this point?
Well, there's quite a few UNESCO sites, and then a few that are likely to become UNESCO sites. Like, there's some stuff online about it, but they're the main huge intact temples. The other megaliths are just protected by the local authorities and the buffer zones around them. But I just find that insane. But I don't know about any future excavations, if they're going to do more work. From 2013 to 2018, as I had mentioned before, there was this project called the Phraxis Project, which was international archaeologists and local archaeologists came together, and they did reinvestigate some of the sites and create some new evidence for carbon dating and things like that. And I've read two of those reports that have been published on it, and it's really interesting. But that's the most recent. So that was concluded in 2018. And then last year they started publishing the monographs related to those excavations. It just fine-tuned the carbon dating and stuff like that. And then there was some interesting finds, which I've talked about a little bit on my channel, like that they found snail figurines deposited into a wall of a temple, which is a bit strange, like it must have been ritualistic. And they found some blocks belonging to what they think was originally a trilithon structure that led up the hill towards Gigantea. So right now, Gigantea, which is a monumental complex, you enter it from the visitor center on the northwest, and it's on a plateau overlooking a valley, and you've got hills in the distance. But it looks like originally they would have come up the valley, actually like made a procession up the hill towards it, which is quite interesting. So there's a few things like that I enjoyed reading about in those monographs, but they're very technical as well. I mean, they are written by experts. There's lots and lots of science in there. They've looked at pollen samples, mollusk samples, paleo soils. I mean, I'm no expert on that, but I just looked at sort of the more interesting highlights to do with those excavations.
Yeah, interesting. Part one, we kind of focused on just the different sites and the ones that you've been to, and we added some pictures. It was kind of like a slideshow episode. I thought, this time we talked about it. Let's do some different stuff and some of the other mysteries and stuff on the island. Let's talk about the ritual activity and why archaeologists think that the temples were the site of some of these rituals. And we kind of discussed it a little bit before, but why don't you go into a little bit more depth?
Well, so the archaeologists of the general opinion that the temples were for animal sacrifice and ritual feasting. So like the community would come together. They don't think the animals were necessarily slaughtered at the temples, probably somewhere else, and then brought to the temples. And then various rituals took place and group feasting. And the reason they think this is because they found obviously lots of animal bones. Sometimes the animal bones are kind of deposited in strange ways. So like underneath the entrance to Gigantea, they found a bowl with a bull's horn in it and pottery sherds and seashells, like hundreds of seashells. So it looked like a ritual deposit on entrance into the temple. And then in all of the temples, they found lots of animal bones, flint knives, hearths for, cooking, altars. And in one of the altars at Tarchien, there was a little hole at the front, and you remove this stone plug from it, and they found animal bones and a flint knife within that kind of hole. So, and it definitely looks like an altar. So that, and then you have these huge vessels and tiny vessels, which must all have been used for the group activity of feasting. And some of them are very shallow, like basins. And I always wonder if that was more like a mortar and pestle or something like that. So you like have really deep, massive, giant vessels. You have like the shallow ones, and you have like these tiny, tiny ones, which must have, as we said last time, held something important and special that could only be served in a small dose. And then you have like kind of these holes, like a tunnel at the front of a couple of the temples in the forecourt, that could have had like an animal tied there with a rope. Although that's what the archaeologists suggest it was for. But then if they're saying that the slaughter took place elsewhere, why would you have live animals tied up outside the temples? I'm not sure. And then there's this one apse at Hajar'im, which is quite strange. It's like got, so as usual, it's a semicircle. It's got the megaliths around the edge, a hole in it, and finely carved circular hole, which may have been for oracular pronouncements by a priestess, etc. You know, the theory. But then there are all these lower orthostats, like lower blocks going around the room. And one of the theories of the archaeologists is that was like a pen to keep animals. So I don't know, on the one side they say they were probably slaughtered elsewhere because there's not much evidence for slaughter there. On the other side they think that they may have been kept there. I don't know. You read kind of conflicting reports. So, but basically based on the giant vessels and the animal bones, it looks as if, and the altars, and the flint knives, it looks as if there was some sort of ritual feasting going on related to animals.
How close is the closest island or somewhere like mainland area? Just in terms, because I'm just thinking like, if you look at Easter Island, one of the theories of why everybody disappeared is because they ran out of resources, and there's only, once you deforest the island and once you eat all the livestock and there's no, I know one of the other theories is that birds were, crapping out seeds, and then the seeds would grow into, different plants and vegetables and things like that. But when they ate all the birds, that kind of went away as well. Is there something you think that happened on Malta like that, where maybe they just ran out of resources, or was it close enough where they could have made a boat or a ship or something and went somewhere nearby?
Well, according to the Phraxis project, the archaeologists think that project actually did look at the environmental degradation of that period of time. And they do believe that the environment did degrade over the time the Temple people were here. And then you have a big gap in time between the Temple people and the Bronze Age people that came later. So it's clear that they did leave the island, or the population was decimated because they ran out of resources. But when they looked into it, yes, there's definitely environmental degradation. The environmental degradation and the emptying of the island coincides with the climate anomaly that took place in the Mediterranean around 2200 BCE. So they do think that it was for environmental reasons that the population emptied out. Now, did they all die or did they go away? Of course, I mean, it's more likely they went away because we know they traded overseas. There's obsidian tools been found from the Neolithic period on Malta, and there was no obsidian to be found in Malta. So it had to have come from nearby islands like Pantelleria or Lipari, which is north of Sicily. So they must have had some seafaring capabilities. And also the distance isn't that far. It's not like Easter Island.
Right.
So it's possible that they did leave the island and, just move somewhere else. But where? Well, that's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And I know it seems like from the pictures that it seems like a place that could get very dry very easily. It's not like a very lush looking island. I'm sure there are spots, but I mean, you can speak to that. Is it seems like it's almost like Sicily in some parts where it seems like very arid and dry.
Yeah, it is very arid and dry. There are no real water sources here, or nothing all year round anyway. The valleys are all dry valleys. It would have been very different in the Mesolithic, Neolithic probably a little bit lusher as well, but now it's changed a lot. I still think though that even if the Neolithic, even if it was really a lot lusher, you know, a lot more greenery, a lot more vegetation, I still find it incredible that whatever population needed to build upwards of 60 temple sites, which meant there must have been, well, hundreds of domestic settlements as well.
Right.
How they actually survived, really, without, I mean, they must have traded a lot, but then most of the pottery that's been found is very characteristic of Malta and insularity. So that's also strange. Yes, they did seem to get tools from abroad, but it's not like you've got loads of artifacts that show it was trading with another civilization overseas.
Yeah, I mean, I know we discussed this a little bit last time, but Malta is pretty unique from the language to, you know, just the way that the megaliths kind of look. I mean, yeah, some of them do look a little similar to other sites around the world, but it does kind of have its own feel and vibe. I guess it could be because of the stone that they used. I mean, it could be a lot of different factors, but you know, there is some crossover stuff too, like those spirals. You know, like I said, those are found in Neolithic Europe. You know, you go to like Newgrange, those same spirals are found, stuff like that. So, do the archaeologists think that there's any? Do they know about like any of the gods or goddesses? Like, is there names? Have they found any like writing or inscriptions? No.
No, this is prehistoric, so there are no inscriptions and no text related to this time period. I mean, even the goddess worship theory is not really on solid ground because the statues could be androgynous. It's not completely clear, and it might not be a deity. It might be a leader of that community, or a priestess or a priest or something like that. So yeah, no one's really certain on that. I mean, I know worldwide and certainly in popular literature now it's seen as this goddess worshipping site, and it's certainly when you look at the statues you get that vibe. But from a technical point of view, the archaeologists are not sure of that. Now, a lot of alternative kind of theorists think that the sheer intensity of the monuments on the island must mean the island was a lot bigger. But we know that the island was bigger, but only during the last ice age when it wasn't inhabited. But during the Neolithic, it was pretty much the size we see today. So still you think really how lush it must have had to be, like amazing for resources to sustain such a population that needed that many temples, unless there was another theory I read, which I kind of like this idea, was that it was used more as a pilgrimage site. So you actually don't have that many domestic settlements. What you might have is, I guess, the equivalent of a hotel, like a village with mud huts that's like a Neolithic kind of temporary settlement for people coming to go to the temples to worship at certain times of the year and then leave
almost
again.
Like
maybe
the Greeks going to like Eleusis, or I just read an article about, or a paper about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and how even the Dead Sea Scrolls where they were found were probably likely as some sort of site that was like a pilgrimage site instead of some sort of Essene settlement or something like that. So no, I mean, I mean, you see writing pop up in Egypt around 3200 BC. Obviously, some of these sites are a little bit older than that, so they have never found any sort of writing other than the symbols and the symbolism found at some of these sites.
Yeah, that's right, and nothing from the Bronze Age. I mean, no, the historic period started a lot later here.
Okay.
So,
when did the historic period start?
So that would be so after the Bronze Age, you have the Phoenician settlements. And then Roman settlements. So that's when we've got like Punic inscriptions, and not that many, but a few Punic inscriptions have been found around the island on stela and stuff. So that's
How do you feel like? I mean, have you found any other connections between Malta and any other Neolithic or megalithic sites around the Mediterranean, or I guess even the world?
I mean, I do see similarities, really strong similarities between Malta and Minorca, but the Minorca ones are later. They're from the Bronze Age. And I was thinking, well, maybe they just left Malta and that's where they went next. Although, I mean, there's no evidence for that. But the way they have like these circular kind of towers, it does look quite similar. Okay, they had T-shaped pillars, which remind you more of Göbekli Tepe than Malta. But I don't know, they look quite similar. And then in terms of like ritual sacrifice, that is something that's in a lot of Neolithic cultures. I mean, they found evidence of it in the pre-Neuralgic cultures of Sardinia. And then, of course, in later, this first civilizations like Egypt, it was a huge factor. And obviously in classical Greece and Roman times. So, I mean, animal sacrifice and this kind of ritualistic thing, it's been there for a long time. And I think that there's no reason to think that they were not somehow connected, these cultures. There's no evidence to say they were, but the fact they were all practicing similar things for whatever reason that we're not really sure about. I mean,
right. I mean, because I think I brought this up last time, but I do see similarities between even some of the Cyclitic culture figurines and gods and goddesses, and then also even like to like Urfa man found it like Göbekli Tepe. And I know that they think that a lot of the Greek migrations came from Western Turkey, obviously, then into that area. But do you think it's possible that maybe some of those people made it west earlier and then came to Malta or Sardinia and like populated those areas? Because it seems like there is some similarities there as well.
Well, the Cyclopean civilization is also later. That's Bronze Age. So, I mean, Malta's older.
Right.
So it might be the other way around. But then that kind of messes up the whole theory of everything going from the Fertile Crescent west. Agriculture kind of started there and went west. Then megalithism of Göbekli Tepe kind of started there and then went west. Because like Malta is one of the earliest. There's some pre-Neuralgic megalithic stuff in Sardinia, although not that much. The megalithic buildings got that became much more of an intense kind of project in Sardinia later. Minorca also Bronze Age, of course, Bronze Age, I believe. So actual firmly in the Stone Age, there's not that many megalithic sites. Well, there are, I mean, dolmens and stone circles, but I mean fully fledged temple sites, like these really complex buildings, not so much. So, you could say maybe it was started in Malta. Well, let's say Turkey, then somehow Malta, and then went east, went west, kind of, it's really hard to say. But it is one of the oldest sites to have such a fully fledged, complicated megalithic building activities. Because obviously you've got your stone rows and your menhirs and dolmens, and there are thousands of them all over the place, and many do date back to the 4500 BCE, so really even earlier than Malta. But this kind of temple culture, when I first was learning about Minorca, I thought, oh, maybe they contemporary, but they're not. I mean, Minorca was a lot later, unless we say that we've got something wrong when we're looking at the dating.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know we recently, a few episodes ago, had Laird Scranton on, and he follows linguistics and philology and of ancient civilizations and for patterns and things like that. And he was talking about like the Faroese people have similar language to words that are found in the Maltese language as well. Obviously, the language came later, which does that mean though that maybe, like you said, like maybe it came from east to west, from parts of Europe to east to west instead of just west to east, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, I mean, it's quite hard to trace. We have this very simplistic sort of viewpoint of it, just everything kind of moving from the Fertile Crescent, and not necessarily a cultural diffusion, more that each area just kind of learned these things by themselves at the same time.
Right.
Like in this area here, and then here, and then, not the same time, but like chronologically going from east to west. But there's a lot of anomalies to that, and a lot of things that can't be explained with that. So, I mean, I'm kind of open to other ideas. And the thing is that if in the Neolithic you didn't really have that many resources here, but you felt the need to build, like, I would say probably there was 100 temples originally, and they're very complicated setups, complete with their artwork and their statues and their finely carved altars. It must have been a really important site, and maybe it was a pilgrimage site for all of the other sort of Neolithic Stone Age civilizations around the Mediterranean. And also keep in mind that all that will remain is something as important as a pilgrimage site. The kind of mud brick huts and the Neolithic villages and settlements, they don't find many of those because they're hard to find. So you could have had quite a few dotted around that were quite important domestic settlements, which are all destroyed today with urban development, all over the Mediterranean, and all the people that belong to those travelled here for pilgrimage. I mean, like I say, there's no evidence. This is quite wild speculation, but I'm just trying to find, I've read people, out of all the things I've read that are alternative, that does actually make logical sense.
What about like around the coastline? Have they ever found anything like off the coast, or maybe if the sea levels weren't as high at one point or anything like that?
I mean, people have found things, but there's never what they found has never been substantiated by further investigators.
Sure.
So it's hard to say. I mean, there was reports of a temple being off the north coast, and it was at a depth which would mean it was, well, Mesolithic, but I mean, it can't really be, because we know from the evidence that's been found so far that there's no carbon dates to that period, and there's no human activity from that period. So when the sea levels were lower, and the cart ruts that go under the sea are off the cliff, those are because of like regional and more recent seismic activity. It's not because it was when the island was bigger that they were carved out. Because then there's this whole theory that maybe the cart ruts are really, really old, and older than the temples and everything.
Yeah, let's talk about the cart ruts for a second. If anybody's interested, you can go look up pictures of them. But is that the prevailing wisdom on those, that those are for sure cart ruts? Have they found carts that were
no. I mean, nobody knows. I mean, if you read the papers that the archaeologists have put together on them, they're like, I mean, they say there's just nothing to explain the varied characteristics of them. Yes, they're probably transport, probably, but what type of transport, they just cannot verify.
Do any of them lead to any of the megalithic sites?
No, they don't.
Okay.
They don't lead to the megalithic sites, but then a lot of them have been destroyed. I mean, you can stand in one, like, there's one in the grounds of the hospital, which a lot of people don't realise is there. It's not signposted, it was just kind of protected by a wall when the hospital was built. And then if you go like a few kilometres north to this town of San Juan, there's another set of protected cart ruts. Well, if you look at a map, it's quite clear that they were once connected. And it's thought that that's the case with a lot of them around the island. So we're looking at right now of hundreds of cart ruts would have maybe been one huge network. People have said maybe they're for irrigation, but that's been disproven. So now it's very much the theory that they had something to do with transport, but they just don't know what, and they don't know exactly when. They think it's pre-Punic, so they're going for the Bronze Age. They don't think it's as far back as Neolithic, when the temples were built, but there's actually no real reason to say. There's no carbon dating for this. There's nothing that you can really associate with it in terms of dating.
Well, for cart ruts too, is there an equal distance between the grooves all the way down?
Yes.
Because if it's not, I would think that then it's for sure not a cart rut. It's just has.
Oh no, they all have a similar gauge.
Okay.
They all have a similar gauge, but then they do strange things. So like sometimes they'll be like, let's say it's 20 centimeters deep. What's that in inches? You guys are working in inches. Let's say 10 inches. And then all of a sudden it just drops at a right angle and goes down like another 10 inches, which would be impossible with any kind of a wheel or a sledge to navigate.
It's 8 inches.
Great.
Get precise.
And then they crisscross each other, they go curvy, some are going down slopes, some are on flat land, and some you get all these crazy sets. I mean, the ones called Clapham Junction, after the British railway station, they're pretty famous because, and they attract a lot of tourists because there's just so many of them in this one space, and they don't seem to make any sense. They all just crisscross each other. Some are really deep, some are shallow, some are curved, some are straight. But there's quite a few sets like that I'm not. I mean, I find all this stuff going through references online, going through loads of different books. There's lots of resources for this, but then there's no one resource where everything is in one place. So you have to really investigate quite a bit. But when you do that, you find some interesting sites. Like I went for a walk one day looking for one that I'd read about. And it was this really complex set, almost as big as Clapham Junction, on the side of a road that I don't think anyone knows is there. So I go off and I'm going through all the undergrowth and looking at them, and I'm just like, wow, and I'm taking all these pictures, and all these people are just stood staring at me thinking, what is she doing? Because they're not like the most famous ones. I don't think the people in that area even know they've got those like around.
Right.
And they're just crazy. And I've noticed, and I haven't read I've never really read a reference to this by anyone else, but I'm sure people have noticed it because it's quite obvious. They all seem to have like a ledge halfway down. As if, like, you know, like a drawer runner, when you pull the drawer out and it sits on something.
So like some sort of inner track or something.
And they all have that. And they very much look carved out rather than worn down. Like they were purposefully carved. So that's probably one of the reasons why experts say Bronze Age, because it would have been easier to carve them out then than it would have been in the Neolithic.
Is there any other sites in the Mediterranean that has a similar thing? Is like, or did they?
Yeah.
Okay. Where else?
There are a few. They have them in Sicily. Not that many though. I mean, I don't believe there's that many, not compared to here. And there's some in Turkey. There's some in the Azores in the Atlantic of Portugal. So yeah, there are a few sites, but you see, when you research that, you don't get many pictures. When you look up Malta, I mean, there's hundreds of them. Sure. Which is also quite strange. Why did they only need a few in those other places, but they needed loads of them here? Whatever the people were that built them, like, what were they doing? Right. This I find absolutely like fascinating, and that's why, even though I call myself the Megalith hunter, I'm also the Cartwright hunter. Because
there you go.
I'm obsessed with them. To be fair, when I put photos of Cartwrights on Instagram, I don't think they get as many likes as megalithic buildings or dolmens or whatever, but I'm absolutely fascinated by them, so it's part of my research. I'm going to keep going around.
How often do you go on your little adventures?
Oh, maybe once every few weeks. I mean, to begin with, when I started this whole thing, it was quite regular because I went back to all the places I've been just looking around, and this time I went with a purpose, you know, to really research it, to take lots of photographs, to look at things from different angles. Then I started making appointments with Heritage Malta to go to the closed sites, the sites that are closed to the public. Then I went through old papers looking for megaliths that have been referenced but are not very well known, you know, off the beaten track, so I can sort of take pictures of them. And now there's not that many. Like, I don't really think there's that many. Now, actually, all my hikes are not looking for ones that have already been investigated or referenced. Now I want to find ones that nobody's found before. So I just take a nice long hike. But during the summer, it wasn't very easy to do that. It was too hot. So I'm just kind of starting back up again with it now.
Yeah, I mean, the next step might be just making friends with more people, trying to get on some private property. You mentioned maybe that there's some sites on somebody's land or something.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly dolmens on private property, and I mean, I don't know who owns those properties, but I know that you can. I've seen some bloggers in the past go to these places, so you know, you can contact them and make an appointment, see if you can talk to the owner and go and see them. So that's certainly something I can do at some point. And then I've also left a couple of places that I want to see in Gozo. I was like, let me save a few things. But yeah, now I'm going to Sardinia next week, and for Sardinia, I've already made an itinerary of the sites I'm going to. Mostly pre-neuralgic ones. I want to look at ones that are contemporary with Malta. Sure. And I've made a whole plan because it's just a few days that I have there. And so then finally, my Instagram feed and my website and my YouTube channel will become more Mediterranean focused than than just Malta.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that's the best way to start seeing the connections and things.
That's sweet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, if anybody hasn't done so already, go check out Laura's Instagram page, which I have the link down below, and also her YouTube channel, which she does these, what are they, 2 to 5 minutes usually, your videos?
Like 8 to 10 usually.
Some of them 8 to 10, okay. Yeah, and they're packed full of information, and she's obviously passionate about this, so go check that out. So what can we learn from some of this stuff in terms of like for the future, or even from the past? I know the old saying, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. Is there anything that you can point to? I know we already talked about like the resource thing. Obviously that's an obvious one, but is there anything else you can think of like that?
Well, I really want to get to the kind of bottom of what these rituals were all about.
Okay, let's do that.
Because it's hard to understand even if you are walking around sacrificing animals and whatnot, what's that about? Why do your deities want you to do that? So we kind of know what was happening in Greece and Rome to some extent. Like you say, with the mystery schools, we actually don't really know a great deal, but we do know on the surface level what all that was about. It was appeasing the gods, celebrating certain seasons, appreciating the return of the sun after the winter and things like that. So there was like a seasonal aspect, there was a survival aspect to it. And that's probably rooted in the deeper past. I assume it must be rooted in the Stone Age, and there must be some continuity between these cultures. They didn't just spring up in Greece and be just doing this stuff, or Egypt or Mesopotamia. I think that they had to have been rooted in one of these prehistoric societies. But still, is it as simplistic as that? Is it really, or was it really all about survival and appeasing the gods, or was there something much more complex going on? And that's really what fascinates me. I see it as like a huge mystery. I don't see it as something as basic as that.
Well, yeah, and I know we touched on it a little bit, but I've always been a proponent of, I always ask people like, have you met the gods? Where are these gods? And my solution to that has always been something that we talk a lot about on the show, which would be entheogens or entheogenic rituals. Mind altered states, altered states of consciousness, because you could make up a story, or like a myth, I guess, but just to truly believe it and go through, like you said, like these animal sacrifices or these rituals, it would make a lot more sense if somebody felt like there was something real there, right? I don't know, that's just my opinion.
Exactly. And I also wonder if I'd read something about like digesting certain animals that had eaten certain plants. Also, because if you ate the plant yourself, it could be dangerous and toxic. But if you ate an animal that had digested the plant, then that can you can go into like a trance-like state, but in a safe way or something like that.
Yeah, there's evidence in Siberia. Some of the shamanic tribes will ingest reindeer urine after the reindeers consume the Amanita muscaria. There are, we did an episode on Easter Island where I kind of made my own connections that after they depleted everything on the island, that they then maybe would fish, the reefs around the island. And there are reef fish that are found in all the way from Hawaii to Polynesia, all the way to French Polynesia, that do have certain toxins. I forget that it's like ichthyotoxin, some long word where you're basically, it's called like fish inebriation, where you become, there is something in it that, and they don't know if it's the fish eating like some sort of coral that has some sort of psychedelic or hypnotic effect or something like that. But you might be onto something there in terms of some sort of animal eating some sort of maybe fungus or something along those lines that are found on the island.
Yeah, maybe, like, because when I read something like that about that could have been one of the reasons for animal sacrifice, I thought, well, but then I don't see how that would apply to all the different diverse animals that were being eaten. The other thing I thought was maybe, so you can get into a trance-like state from fasting. That was something that also took place in ancient Greece. So instead of eating plants. So maybe they'd fasted for such a long period, and then there was like a ritual feasting aspect to celebrate it or something when they came out of their trance or their initiatory period or something.
Yeah.
And the way the apses can be closed off here, I mentioned before, you have like these holes which they think were hinges, and you would tie a rope and put a barrier across, which is decomposed since then, like probably made of, I don't know, an animal's skin or wood or something. Well, maybe the apses were closed off because they were being used as kind of like incubation, initiation chambers. Like people would go there specifically on this kind of, let's call it a pilgrimage for want of a better word. Either they are getting high from plants, or they're going into a trance-like state through fasting, and they go into these places and they stay there for a certain fixed period until they get whatever messages they need to get, and then they come out and feast and celebrate. And maybe it's like several times a year, or it coincides with certain astronomical alignments. I don't know. I mean, I'm just like, there's no evidence. I'm just like throwing it all out there because that's
that's a
fun
good
thing
thing.
to
You know,
do.
you got to make speculations at some point.
Yeah.
Do you
exactly.
think that, or have they looked into like were animals or livestock brought to the island at some point pre Bronze Age, like some of the more ancient stuff, or is there no evidence of that? Like, where do they think some of a lot of the stuff came from, or is it all just indigenous to the island?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they know. Like, I don't think they know. It's just, yeah, it could be indigenous. I mean, from the Mesolithic, so I did a video on bone caves during the Ice Age. Obviously, the fauna on the island was quite different then to what it was in the Neolithic. But I don't know how those animals got here, like the Neolithic animals. It could be. I mean, if they had moved wholesale from somewhere else, or they were setting it up as a pilgrimage site, maybe they, shipped everything with them. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I always use Easter Island as a reference point because we've done a lot of episodes on it and like talking about it. But yeah, at some point, the people that migrated from Polynesia and Micronesia and all those areas going east, they definitely think that they brought pigs and livestock. And one of the other theories is that rats hitched a ride and then ate like the palm nuts on the island and deforested it that way, and maybe ate some of the other stuff. So I was just curious if maybe. I mean, obviously, if people migrated there, they probably brought something. I would imagine they needed food for the travel. So
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, we'll talk about this. I've got some stuff I wanted to talk about in the Patreon later for that.
sure.
Some details that I've read in excavation reports about where the people actually came from. But yeah, it's kind of it's fascinating to me because I approach this in a really detailed way, as you can see. Not just because I've been in Malta, like without going anywhere for so long, for the past like almost 2 years, but because I really wanted to be thorough. I want to visit every single site, or at least reference every single site that currently exists. I wanted to go through all the archaeological research that's been done in a lot of detail, not just the guidebooks, like the proper intense research, because a lot of work has been done, cannot be ignored. There's lots of science gone into it. The carbon dating examples, like they've been, as I say, recently redone, and they're fairly confident in the dates that they've come up with. So I like to really go into detail on all of this and then start to speculate on finding connections, because I'm not an expert, and the whole point of doing this is to try and solve some mysteries. It's to bring together lots of different subjects, for take an interdisciplinary approach, but use as much thorough research as I can. And then, so that now I've started reading some books with some alternative theories, looking at astronomical alignments, coming up with kind of my own ideas, looking at what you can learn from later civilizations that may have had their mythologies and their practices rooted in the ancient past. And that's where I'm at now. And now I'm starting to then cast that net a bit wider and take it to other countries to see what we can find there as well. I think I have to read quite a few excavation reports in Italian, though, for Sardinia, which is going to be a challenge. Anyways,
Well, if you can figure
I can only
out,
order wine, so I'm going
yeah,
to struggle a bit.
if you can figure out the Maltese language, I think you're okay. Because I think, like I said,
I haven't figured it out, but I mean, I've done some courses I did the courses. I passed the courses.
There you go.
It's something. But yeah, so and I want to make sure that I do it really thoroughly. Once again, everything they found at each site, all the scientific evidence they have from that site, how that relates to other sites in that area, and I'm going to build it out, and just keep going around different places. And that's kind of like the position I'm at now. And now I am starting to like speculate and find connections. And I think a lot of the alternative theories that have been put forward in the past were put forward without the most recent excavation reports, because they've only just been published.
Sure.
And I think a lot of it was based on quite old work, actually. So now it's good to revisit all of this and to look at it from a different angle.
And also, you have a lot of people that write a lot of books that have never even been to any of these places. They're just reading other people's papers or research and connecting their own dots. But you're actually able to go to all these sites and physically be there. So I think that adds a layer when you're doing research and when you're making those connections that you might not see in other people's work because they're not there. I think that does make a difference in some regard. So.
I think like when you're just reporting on it, like when you see me doing YouTube videos and I feature some international sites, I'm reporting on it, talking about it, finding connections that I can see just, on a fairly, as I always say, like a relatively superficial level. But when I go into a lot more detail, and anything I put on Instagram, that is my personal, like I visited it, and I put these conclusions and ideas together from really visiting these places and looking at them as well. And that's why I'm trying to be very thorough with each site, so that I can leave no kind of stone unturned. Because even whenever I go to Hajra'im here, I notice something I haven't noticed before. Every time. It's amazing. It's such a complicated site.
Yeah.
I found something last week, and I was like, I came up with this idea, and I thought, yeah, but the only way that I would be able to prove that is if there was this particular feature on it. I'll check the satellite image. I go on the satellite image and there is this particular feature on it, and I'm like, oh my god, mind blown. But I need to get some more information, so I've written to a couple of experts to see if anyone's noticed this feature before I talk too much about it. But and so I was like, once again, you just notice things. So I do think it's important to be thorough. I think it's the whole community within the megalithic space that's talking, and within mysteries in general, ancient mysteries. There's nothing wrong with finding connections and researching without visiting the sites. But for anything that I do on Malta, I'm really trying to, obviously I can visit them. And in the Mediterranean in general, I can visit them. So I'm trying my best to do that, as well as obviously I am putting together videos where I feature things that I've seen in the UK and in Spain, which I haven't been to, or recently anyways, or certainly not when I've been of this kind of project where I'm taking photos and everything like that. So it's I want to do it as thoroughly as possible and as first person as possible, but there are restrictions. You can't go everywhere, and you do sometimes have to sort of put together conclusions based on other people's visits as well. But I love the fact that a lot of people on YouTube are going around sites, and they're going real close up, they're going into a lot of detail, and that's great, because then you can actually really look at it and then sort of form your own conclusions.
Absolutely. One thing I find interesting, since Malta is one of the older sites, prehistory sites, that if you even go back like 7,000 or not 7,000, I think it would be 4,000 from the oldest Malta site, but you look at Göbekli Tepe, it's crazy to think at like how intricate some of those relief carvings are. There are figurines, there are so-called goddess stuff going on. You don't really see that at Malta. Malta just seems a little bit cruder, but it's so much later that that just fascinates me.
Yeah, me too. I find that really strange. I'm actually really surprised by how detailed Göbekli Tepe is, considering it's like 9,600 BC. I mean, that fascinates me, because here, you don't get as many animal relief carvings, And the ones you have are very faint, even though some of the sites here were buried as well. Yeah, I don't know. It's a strange one, isn't it?
Do you think Malta maybe had that at some point, but because of, erosion and being near the sea and the winds and the salt and all that, as opposed to a Göbekli Tepe where it was buried for so long, I mean, Göbekli Tepe is almost 12,000 years old or 11,600 years old. And I mean, how old is the oldest site at Malta?
Megalithic is like 3,800 BC, so 5,000 years old.
Yeah, so
yeah, I mean, it could be as an island, obviously with the wind and the sea, you could expect erosion. You know what I also find a bit strange here, though, is like some of the temples. So they'll say that certain temples are all like, let's say, Gigantea period. Like one will have 5 apses, one will have 3, one will be made of bigger blocks, another one's smaller block. If you had that sort of sophisticated construction skills, would you not build them all the same,
right,
or of the same level of quality? And some don't even have, they never found anything in them. I mean, it could be that they were rummaged at some point over the thousands of years that's not in recorded history or in recent history. But yeah, some of them don't even have altars or decorations or anything. Or remnants of plaster with red ochre, which some of them do have. So, they had red walls.
How durable is that stone versus like I'm using granite's super, hard and will, last throughout the years. But I mean, limestone can slowly degrade. Like how durable is the stone that they use there compared to some of the other megalithic sites found around the world?
Oh no, I mean, it's quite soft.
Soft, okay.
Yeah, like it can, well, they used 2 types, Globigerina and Upper Coralline. Coralline is very coarse. It doesn't leave a smoother finish. Globigerina can be carved much nicer, like finely, more intricately.
Right.
And a lot of the spirals and the things that you see are carved into that type of stone. And some of the temples are built of that and some of the other one. But the actual decorations and the altars inside are usually made of the softer limestone.
Yeah, just in Malta is just so bizarre, like I said, in comparison to a lot of the other sites. Maybe because they didn't have as many resources or something, I don't know. But
and people keep saying like, oh, but don't you think they might be older because of the fact that there's quite a bit of variety between the different temples in terms of that, like I say, the quality of the finishing. The fact that there's so many monuments on one tiny island, maybe they're older and it's from a time when the island was bigger. But the thing is, the carbon dating is the carbon dating.
Right.
And I mean, they've gone right into the paleo soils, deep down around these temples and pulled out so many samples. It's quite hard to argue with that.
Absolutely.
Unless there's something we're really missing. I always say this. Could be something really obvious that we're missing.
Well,
Yeah.
There being people there and then not people there for a while, stuff like that makes you wonder, because the areas, there's some decent volcanoes in that, not on Malta, but in that area in the Mediterranean. Maybe something happened at some point and they had to get out of there, or even worse. But yeah, I don't know. It's just so fascinating, and you're lucky that you get to live there. I know there's probably some perks to obviously you doing your show or your channel and being able to go to different sites.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that you're going to? You said you're going to Sardinia. Do you have a plan to just go to all the Mediterranean sites, or is that something that you're just going to kind of play by ear?
I want to go to all the sites in the world.
Hey, that's...
It's all budget dependent. We'll have to wait and see. Yeah, and like I say, I want to do it in a really
that sometimes it drops out for a second, but yeah, we were just discussing you going to all the different sites in Europe and then even the world.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do as thorough a job as I can, because it takes a really long time to read all these reports and books on each site. And I really want to be as comprehensive as possible, because I really want to solve some mysteries here. And I mean, there's so much really good work already been done. And now it's like, it's a matter of kind of trying to unite all of that academic work that's been done, all that major expert soil samples, every detailed thing, which is quite boring to read, with what those of us as independent researchers can see as kind of connections in other interdisciplinary matters. Because we have kind of, when you work within that, your expertise is so niche in one specific area. And I like the fact that as independent researchers, we can just sort of take it all. And yes, it doesn't mean you're going to create, like, solve the mystery or conclude everything once and for all, because that would be kind of, I think, quite difficult, because no one can be an expert in everything. And when you do start to look at things on an interdisciplinary level, you're going to miss some things, obviously, because you're not an expert in each thing. But you can definitely start to speculate and come up with some ideas that make sense of it all.
So did you study any of this stuff in school, or this is just all something that came up later? That's just your passion?
I mean, originally I did businesses and language, and then in my master's degree, which was a few years ago, I did Mediterranean studies, which, yeah, I mean, it's Mediterranean studies, but I'm not a historian and I'm not an archaeologist or anything. It was an interdisciplinary course, but what it taught me was sort of how to research, because my first degree was 20 years ago, and it was back then you didn't even have online journals. Now you have all these online journals, there's lots of things being digitized. It really taught me how to approach things in a disciplined way and to really root through all the data and to reference it properly as well. So that's so it has come in handy, and obviously being Mediterranean studies, it did, feature the Mediterranean. So my master's dissertation was on the evil eye belief. So it was I actually had a fairly anthropological approach to my dissertation.
Interesting.
So
I was just curious. I don't know if you're aware of the vibe out there with archaeologists, but even like on Twitter, they're like super aggressive and like dismissive and even mean. There's a couple cool ones, but and I'm not trying to generalize, but they're all against, they call anything that's not part of their work pseudoscience is basically what it comes down to. So if they look at,
that's okay. We're not trying to get jobs as archaeologists because we're not archaeologists.
Right. And I think they feel more threatened by archaeologists that are actually looking into this kind of stuff than they do about the general public. Yeah.
The independent researchers, as I say, we're not experts. I have a good grounding in research. I'm educated in the Mediterranean, and I understand, like I said, my dissertation on the evil eye, that was about belief systems, and that fascinates me. But I'm not an expert, and that's my disclaimer. I'm an independent researcher that's chosen this area because it fascinates me, it interests me. For such a long time I've been passionate about it. I've read so many books on it. I've been following all the researchers for years, but it's just been something that I didn't have the time to turn into anything until the past year. And now my angle on it is trying to be really thorough in looking at the secondary research that's kind of academic and really serious, and differentiating that by what the independent research is coming up with, but looking at it all and then kind of putting it all together and speculating based on that, and coming up with my own ideas, obviously. And I think it is important to bridge that gap. Yes, everybody kind of is trying to do that. Like, everybody's saying, let's bridge this gap. Let's not be so niche and specific as the experts, as the archaeologists. Let's open it up. Let's look at other subjects. Let's look at it from different angles. And I think that's great. But I still think we must not forget that so much research has been done, which is very highly scientific and very interesting. And thousands of pages have been written by these experts, so it shouldn't be dismissed. But what we need to do is take that and then mix that with the other kind of subjects. Like, I think it's important to look at it from all different angles: geological, environmental, looking at, like, it's really, like, we're not supposed to, like, I guess, look at classical Greece and say that their beliefs are steeped in the Stone Age, and that's why they were doing the things they were doing here. But it's really, it's speculation, and it's okay to do it. When you say, disclaimer, I'm not an expert, and what I do write and what I do come up with is based on this interdisciplinary approach. But you can't say that I'm not using the good references, because I'm using all the proper references and using all the academic research. I'm not saying the temples are way older and then just ignoring the carbon dates. I'm saying these are the carbon dates, but these are the reasons why it looks a bit strange.
Well, I mean, you even have this paper that came out recently this week to show those footprints. I don't know if you saw, found in New Mexico that date all the way back to, I think White Sands is where they found it, all the way back to 21,000 years ago. And there's a cave in Chiquihuite, Mexico that they found 30,000-year-old stone tools, so like this idea that Clovis first in the Americas that's been prevailing for so long is obviously wrong. And there's alternative researchers like Graham Hancock, who archaeologists hate, that have been saying that for like the longest time. So
you see, that's what I like about Graham Hancock, though.
And he's wrong about stuff, but he admits it usually when he's wrong about something.
But there is difference in quality, right, of independent research. And that's why I'm really trying to take this kind of approach where I use as much of the actual data that there is, and then mix it with sort of speculation and other theories and sort of sensible ideas. What I like about Graham Hancock is he's done not just he doesn't just use incredibly good secondary research. Like, he does go through proper reports and books from experts in detail, and he sifts through so much data. So his secondary research is extremely detailed, but he also does a lot of primary research. I mean, he's hired people in the past to go around doing his own data analysis on things. So, I mean, that's solid work.
Mm-hmm.
So when they start saying pseudo, I think, well, I mean, yeah, let's say, once again, independent researchers are not experts. They're not trained as archaeologists. And if they were trained as archaeologists, they wouldn't be able to do this. They wouldn't be able to look at the other interdisciplinary subjects related to it, look at it from different angles, conduct their own research on their own budget. Like, they wouldn't be able to do that. So I think there's nothing wrong with him doing that, as long as you do it in a fairly detailed way, as I say. I
think that there's an element of jealousy, and I know probably a lot of archaeologists would scoff at that, but I think there's an element of jealousy in the sense that he's not tied to academia, so he can speculate. He can look at the bigger picture. He can put pieces together that a real scientist is not even supposed to do, like through the scientific method. So there's that aspect of it. But I also think that there's a jealousy in the sense that, not that he's right all the time, but like the Clovis first thing, like he's been saying, for a long time now that Clovis first, there's people that have been there. There's evidence showing that there's people in the Americas before 14,000 or 15,000 BC or whatever the date was. So you have that, and then you also have the science communicator aspect of it, which is most archaeologists are not good public communicators. Like they're not, again, I'm on Twitter. I see it's a lot of fighting. It's a lot of putting people down, especially the public. Like I find that science and Avi Loeb, who we've had on, who's, one of the most accredited scientists out there, that now he's looking at extraterrestrial life possibly, and the Galileo project and all this stuff. There's some people that scoff at that, but he's got a lot of credentials. And he, has said many times that science should serve the public, should serve public interest. It shouldn't self-serve. Like a lot of these people they want this slow crawl within academia, this like slow, this going through all the minutia and just build this picture through this. I don't even know how to explain what I'm trying to say, but it's just like they're missing. I don't know if enough of them take philosophy of science. I don't know if enough of them know how to engage with people, like, in conversation, but it's very off-putting as somebody who's interested in these topics. And I had to go the alternative route to get into this stuff. And now I have a balance of both the alternative and the mainstream stuff, but it's just like, I don't know. We've been lucky to have a lot of cool scientists and academics on the show, but there are a lot of them out there, especially on social media, that are very off-putting.
Oh, of course. It's one of those subjects that just attracts, like, especially because mostly the reason that we're all in this is because there is an interesting mystery to do with humanity, to do with ancient history. There's one heck of a mystery here. And archaeologists will happily say in their papers, well, we're not sure why this was. Probably it was ritualistic, probably it was this, probably it was that, okay? They speculate also, they have to. So there's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with a load of us, as many as possible actually, loving this subject, getting into it and doing our own investigations. I think that's great actually, because it adds to it. And sometimes you do uncover small things which then they can actually take further on a sort of academic level if they wanted to. Like, let's say you stumble across a new megalith, which is the dream, and then that's a whole new site for them to excavate and interpret it how they want. But you know, by going around and doing what we're doing, we are opening up those type of opportunities as well. And I think for the general public that love mystery, it's important there's proper researchers, because they're not going to sit there and necessarily read through all these soil samples. And it's also not necessarily great for them to listen to lots of sensationalist stuff, you know? I think it's good if they are listening to people that are bridging the gap. And there are so many of us doing that. There's some great people doing that. So
I've actually been shocked by how many of them don't know about other things even within their own field, like new discoveries and latest research. It's kind of shocking that some of them are that arrogant, considering they're so focused on just this one, you know, minutia of this one topic that, you know, then they go off on these rants. It baffles me, but there are a large number that aren't even aware of some of the latest discoveries.
Yeah, I know. And it's a shame. And you know, when you hear people like Graham Hancock being taught to be pseudo, I'm like, come on, have you read the books and the amount of data he's sifted through? That is not.
I think the Atlantis thing is. Yeah, the Atlantis thing is, I think, what rubs the researchers
most. The
most.
lost civilization thing is not crazy. There have been so many natural disasters in recorded history, and then in the geological record, many more disasters going back, you know, millions, billions of years. Why can we not say that there was a lost civilization? It's really not that crazy.
I mean, I'd like to hear your take, but for my personal, when we started this podcast, I thought Atlantis was probably one real place or a civilization that got wiped out via the Younger Dryas impact or whatever the case may be. Through reading Plato's dialogues a bunch of times and going through and I'm starting to realize, this is my personal belief, that I think it's just another allegory in the sense that this is what could happen to your civilization, because it's happened many times over. And you're pointing out that there are real places like Göbekli Tepe and other places yet to be found, Karahan Tepe and all these places, which I think is, and you know, we should be looking at Doggerland and Sundaland and all these coastal regions as well. I will point out though, I mean, the Athenians weren't around, 11,000 BC or 9,000 years prior to. So there's certain aspects that I don't understand. If you've read Plato's dialogues,
of
how
course,
you could think that he uses detail, he describes it and whatever. That's just my personal belief. Like I said, I don't necessarily believe it was one place, but I look at it like the allegory of the cave, where we use the allegory of cave when we're talking about paradigm shifts and just this idea of this shifting consciousness. I think the same way about Atlantis, where it's the story. It's like a watch out kind of a thing, like this could happen to you one day. So, that's just how I
don't think it's necessarily a specific place, but what it is warning us about is, I think, natural disasters, because there have been so many.
Sure.
There's been so much catastrophe in the history of the planet. And we are probably being warned about that. I'm not saying it necessarily destroyed a very advanced civilization, but it did destroy the civilizations that have existed before, however advanced they might be. And I think certainly on the most basic level, as a warning about disasters, it could be quite grounded in truth. And that's what I don't understand, is when people get really crazy about that, because I'm like, but you do. We have tremors here,
right.
How do you think it's impossible that there was that's very well, that catastrophes have destroyed that? And you go if Santorini, that was destroyed by a volcano.
Oh, absolutely.
So why is it so crazy? Yes, okay, an advanced civilization looking in a certain way. Yeah, like you say, that the war with the Athenians before the Athens existed. Yeah, it all seems a bit far-fetched and strange. But I don't think that the actual catastrophic element is far-fetched. And I think that if we look in history, there is definitely something. There is a big mystery there. In ancient history, there is a big mystery about humanity, and I don't think it's as simple as the hunter-gatherers to the Neolithic, to this, to that, Fertile Crescent West, Fertile Crescent East. I think we're missing something.
Well, I mean, we've been Homo sapiens sapiens for what, between 200 and 300,000 years?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long time. And that's why I think even if you look at Göbekli Tepe, that's what's so fascinating to me is like, when did we domesticate ourselves? Because, right, that's the prevailing knowledge, is that we somehow domesticated ourselves as well as domesticating animals and created animal husbandry, that thing, kind of a thing. Why did we domesticate ourselves? Is it, and then if you look at that, that's the biggest shift in consciousness and technology we could probably point to, even compared to today, because that was the point where we were like, we're done traveling, we're done migrating around, we're going to set up shop and we're going to manipulate our environment. That's at least how I look at it. I don't know if you look at it in a similar way.
Mm-hmm. No, I do find it quite strange. Also, just because the agricultural revolution coincided with the end of the Younger Dryas, more or less. And it's like, okay, why did that catastrophe or that sort of shift in our environment change us so much? What happened? It seems
that's the theory, right? Though, is the trauma from that is what had an effect on us. And I know that, again, you could even look at Atlantis as like an archetype of, of a type of civilization, whether it be, again, I don't think it was a real place, but it could just be this idea of a place where people had, were doing well, and then something bad happened and it created this trauma that we now have like embedded into us or our psyches.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. No, it would definitely, we're missing something, and I'm determined to at least kind of like, okay, you can't completely solve the mystery, but you can definitely come up with a new idea. And I'm working on like a theory of my own. But I still say okay, so let's say there was an ancient civilization and it was pretty sophisticated. It didn't necessarily have to look the same as ours, which we may consider sophisticated or not, depending how you look at it. And it existed during the last ice age, let's say. And then because of the climate change, and then because of the catastrophe of the Younger Dryas, because of all those changes, it was destroyed. Where is it? Like, where's the evidence? Because all we have from the ice age is the evidence of hunter-gatherers. Mm-hmm. We don't have anything else, really. So, and I was saying this on my channel, like, okay, you can say maybe it's all under the sea, but I still think that would be what's the only kind of were in those areas. And then, unless the catastrophe, whatever happened, destroyed the evidence, or the evidence is there, we're just not seeing it because it's not in a form that we would expect it to be. But it's certainly still a possibility, I guess.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
But I'm more intrigued as to what actually happened at the end of the last ice age with the agricultural revolution and all these movements that happened since then, and where exactly all these countries fall into in those like 10, 11,000 years. Like what was going on? That's kind of more what fascinates me.
Absolutely. And, like as you mentioned, natural disasters obviously do happen. There's a new paper that just came out. I don't know if you saw this, where archaeologists are fighting about this right now. The Tal el-Hammam site in the Jordanian Valley, which they think could have been the biblical Sodom, or they think that maybe that was the influence or whatever. I mean, you can, people talk about floods. There's a flood myth for there's a flood myth for every civilization, right? You have you can go to any, you have Noah's Ark obviously, but then you have and I'm not saying that found any actual Noah's Ark. I know that there's some people that talk about that as if they found certain things, but you can go to any ancient civilization, they have some sort of cataclysm or flood myth or The Epic of Gilgamesh. That could have even been the inspiration for Noah's Ark too. So I
Yeah,
think
it
about
looks like it was traced back to that. Yeah.
right. I think about
The
things like
story.
that. I don't necessarily draw direct conclusions. This was this place exactly, kind of a thing. But just was there an influence there for sure?
And something did happen. I mean, we know that things really did change after the last glacial maximum. Things changed on a huge scale, and it does make sense that that the people that experienced it, the meltwater pulses and all the changes to their environment, the people that experienced that and survived and passed it down in the generations, like you say, Homo sapiens sapiens, 200 to 300,000 years. So this wasn't really that long ago.
Right.
That they would have recorded what happened, that they would have passed it down in oral tradition, and then it would eventually get written down in the historic period when these early civilizations developed around cities. I mean, it makes sense. I don't know why we think the floods didn't happen. They obviously happened. That's geological fact.
Right. Yeah, it's just like, again, you can go to pretty much any, even Yima and Navara from Zoroastrianism. I mean, there's just so many that you can just look through ancient texts and find that. But what do you think? Let's get into, before we wrap up and start getting into the Patreon stuff. Do you want to talk about astronomical alignments and some of the megalithic sites on Malta?
Yeah, I really want to get into astronomical alignments properly because it's so complicated and I do need to research it a bit more. But I've been reading a few different things on it. So the general idea here is that the Niger and Hajar'im temple complexes, which are close to each other, they're like 500 meters apart from one another, were oriented towards the solstices and the equinoxes. Okay. Fine. Just like they say Stonehenge was and whatnot. But then why were all the other temples not aligned with the solstices and the equinoxes? I don't get it. If it was so important to them from either a practical or a ceremonial viewpoint. And then I've been reading some other theories. So there was this temple called Tal Adi, of which not very much remains. They found this thing they call the star tablet, and it's got, clearly stars, a crescent moon, and lines carved into it. And it's just part of a tablet. And they think it was once a big round disc. It's contemporary with the Neolithic, with the temple period, and it does make you think that they were using the temples as observatories. There are a few theories on this. I was reading about it earlier. So one of the theories is that this particular disc was used to measure the ecliptic latitude of the moon and the planets. And there's a few diagrams online for that. Okay, so that's another theory. Then I read this book just now by Lenny Redick called, I've forgotten the name of it. I'll message you with it. You can put it in the link.
Okay.
It's about the star Sirius, which the ancient Egyptians did a lot of festivals around, and they observed the heliacal rising of it. Well, her suggestion is that Malta, all of the temple's axes were aligned with the rising or setting of Sirius, and the reason why all the axes are slightly different is because it was following precession. The precessional changes, obviously, of the star. And her theory looks at the temples that are extant, where they know what the axes looked like from finding the traces of the floors. But her theory is that it was followed for thousands of years, and all the lost sites, if you were to find them all and put them all together, you would see basically a new temple built every 50 or 100 years, following the precession slowly.
And anybody that doesn't know what precession is, by the way, precession of the equinox is the constellations and stars move in the sky about 1 degree every 72 years, and a full cycle is also known as Plato's Great Year, which is 25,000 years, something like that.
And I had seen a lecture she gave at Megalithomania a few years ago on YouTube. I had seen about this book, but I hadn't read it. Finally, I read it all this week. And it's a fascinating theory. The only problem with it is that For the axes of the temples to be aligned with Sirius and to follow the procession, it has to have been during the Mesolithic. So it doesn't coincide with the Neolithic time, the dating that's been given to the temples at the moment. And that's kind of the problem, because it looks as though a few academics in the past, according to her research, have also found some connections with that, with the azimuth of, I'm not good with astronomy, of Sirius. But they had to do away with it with that theory because it didn't match the carbon dating. So I think this is a really fascinating theory. I want to look into it a bit more. And then there are also some other small things that have been found, artifacts, like with what looks like a sun on them, some beads with what looks like a sun. So it could have been like a solar worshipping temple sites. Yeah, it's interesting. But like in later Egyptian civilization, it wasn't just Sirius. I mean, they had Osiris or Orion's belt. They were looking in. They looked a lot at Ra, the sun god. They were worshipping the sun god. They seemed to align things a lot with the rising and the setting sun. There were so many cosmological symbols in what they did in their everyday rituals and practices, and the way that they aligned their buildings. So, and I think I'd read something once as well, didn't they change the temples, the axis of a temple in relation to the precession of the equinoxes as well? So we know that was a very sophisticated culture in terms of the astronomical knowledge. They were everything they did seemed to be related to the cosmos. So yeah, I think it's very possible that in the Stone Age, the same thing was happening. That knowledge had to have come from somewhere. And these observations usually have to have been made over a really long period of time, unless it's as simple as they just look at the rising and setting sun in the seasons. Right. But if they did capture much more sophisticated knowledge of the movements of the stars in their stone monuments, then we can say that they did have that knowledge and that they passed it on to later civilizations. But I'm not convinced of all of these things. The solstices and equinoxes, Sirius, don't know, still feel like we might be missing something, because, and just to tell you one basic reason why, but I won't go into detail because I really do need to go to look into this more. And like I say, from a more sort of scientific viewpoint, because I'm not very knowledgeable in astronomy. But some of the temples here, which are further away from the south coast, so to look at Sirius, you would need the best alignments were the ones where the temples are on the south coast and just in alignment with the horizon, of the sea. Right. If you go further north, they're blocked by hills, so it takes longer before you see the star. Surely if you're really into the rising and setting of a star, and that's like what all your rituals are around, you would make sure all your temples were on the coast, looking out to the horizon, so you see it immediately as it comes up and immediately as it sets. So I don't know, like just before it goes below the horizon. So I'm not sure. I just feel like, why would they do that? And then also it still doesn't explain why if you look at that theory, it would still mean that some of the smaller temples were later than the bigger temples. I don't know. Like Tahadrat, for example, which is quite a small trefoiled primitive looking temple, would have actually been one of the sort of later ones. So I don't know. I want to look into it properly. I only finished the book yesterday, on the Sirius one. And the solstice and equinox stuff like that, you can just see on the Heritage Malta website. They do events around it. People go and watch it. And then the stuff about the star tablet. I mean, yeah, when you look at the graphs online, you could see that is aligned with these ecliptical planes. So I'm not sure.
I mean, for me, it's always been with the astronomical alignments and ancient people being fascinated by the stars. It's kind of a no-brainer in the sense that that's all they have really at nighttime is the night sky. There's no electricity, that obviously no, light pollution or anything like that. So you do get great, great visuals of the sky back then. But also, I mean, even look at ancient Greece, like Hipparchus figured out precession. Plato, Plato's great year exactly is about 25,772 years. And you look at like how did they know? How were they so accurate? Obviously, mathematics and a lot of the ancient Greeks would go to Egypt to learn about math and things like that, and come back. You have Thales and Pythagoras and different people that have gone to Egypt historically, and then come back with some sort of superior knowledge in the realm of mathematics and philosophy and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the astronomical alignments are a little bit different because they do have to be precise for it to make sense. But you have to also look at where things were in the sky and the exact dating. The dating has to be exactly on for it to like line up, with a lot of these sites. But I was thinking, those portals in some of the megalithic sites on Malta, is it possible that some of those were like viewing windows kind of, or maybe light would shine through there or anything like that? Do you think that that's a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I always wonder that as well. I mean, that's why I actually really enjoyed this book, because it just really opened my mind to that possibility. I just think it might not be that star because the dating's off. But then that's what everybody's saying, but maybe we're missing something. And also, like I say, why would you build a temple by a hill? I don't know, like when it's coming up on the horizon,
right?
Unless there was some, I don't know. I've always actually thought with that temple that because it looks out towards this hill, there was some significance there, because that hill was caused probably, I mean, by a massive seismic event, but a very long time ago. Probably millions of years ago. And I always wonder if the ancients were actually trying to capture some geological knowledge as well as astronomical in their temples, because the geology of the earth has changed a lot and it's been really important to humanity's survival. So I'm not sure, but it fascinates me. It opens my mind to these things. And I do think that there might be some astronomical explanations for the temples. I actually don't even think they were fully roofed. I've got it in my head that there was probably like an oculus in the middle, like when you go to the Pantheon in Rome.
Sure.
And it was for viewing like that. And in which case, that would change the area of the sky that you're looking at, because you wouldn't be looking at the horizon. And then the axis of the temple wouldn't matter. So I know I got all these ideas in my head, but I want to look into them in a bit more detail because I'm not super knowledgeable astronomically. And this person I'm talking about, this author, I mean, she wrote a cracking book. Like, there's really good research in it. It's very detailed. So, yeah, I wanna kind of look into it a bit more. There are a few things. There are a few things that are still really, putting questions in my head but the thing is, like I say, everybody that's researching this and everybody that's putting this together, it's great because it just opens your mind to something. Then you come up with, you might say, okay, I'm not sure about that because of this, but then now that's given me this other idea. Everything contributes to this area of thinking. And I've also got it in my head that the temples had like an upstairs section, because I keep I don't know, there's these stairs and then in one of the temples, and I'm sure it goes to this exit at the back, but it also sits on the top of the fill between two walls. And I'm thinking maybe there was like a sort of an upstairs or a roof that you actually used for something, like a viewing platform. How would we know? Because the roofs have all caved in.
Right.
But quite a few have stairs either around the side or inside going to nowhere. Like in Tarshin, there's some stairs that go to nowhere. In Tassilj, which is very scanty remains, but the stairs going up around the side of the wall, and I could imagine them when the wall actually was there, going all the way to the top. Sorry, my cat. And then he's hungry. And then he's only eaten 16 times today, so not enough for him. And then we have some stairs to nowhere at Tahajrat as well. And I just got it in my head, but how would you know if there was an upstairs or not? Because it wouldn't still be there. These monuments were all found covered in soil and were being ploughed in farmers' fields at the time.
Sounds like our cat.
He'll calm down in a minute.
I find that noise that cats make is pretty interesting. It's like no. It sounds like somebody's saying no.
Yeah, it always sounds like he's talking to. He's a very old cat. This one. He's 23.
Yeah, our cat's getting up there too. How old's your cat?
23.
Wow, that is old. I thought our cat was old. Our cat's 16.
So he doesn't eat like lots in one go, just lots of small meals, which is why I have to keep eating it. But anyway, he's fine.
So yeah, let's wrap it up here though, and we'll do the Patreon segment now in a second. But yeah, we can do a part 3 too once you get some of the more astronomical stuff in order and process all that, because I think that stuff's pretty interesting, especially in correlation to all the megalithic sites and stuff. So, but thank you so much for coming back on and sharing your research and obviously your knowledge of the island. And it's got to be fascinating to live there and be able to just go to these sites whenever. And I think that that's everybody's dream that's passionate and into these topics. So
thank you guys. Really enjoyed it.
And if anybody's interested, go check out Laura's YouTube channel. She does these awesome videos. They're packed with all sorts of knowledge and facts, and it shows her going to these different sites and she's got pictures and everything. So go check that out. She also does stuff on Instagram. She has a great Instagram channel, so go check that out. I have the link down below as well. And yeah, we're about to do a Patreon segment with her, so go check that out. So before we head on out of here, if you want to head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/MindEscapePodcast for just $2 a month, you'll get exclusive guest episodes and segments. We're about to do one with Laura. I have one up there with Rick Strassman from last week. I've got one with Matthew Clark about his Soma research and what was Soma in the ancient world. And I also have one with Laird Scranton on there, so go check those out. And head on over to Indra's Web at indrasweb.org. This is the social media platform we created to connect open minds. So if you like having these kinds of conversations, head on over there, set up a profile. We are still working on getting that in the App Store. And one more thing before we get out of here, if you are interested in a Mind Escape t-shirt, we can enter you to win that at the end of October. So if you're interested, all you have to do is go to Apple Podcast and leave a 5-star review and take a screenshot of it, send it to mindescapepodcast@gmail.com, and we will enter you to win, and we'll probably pick somebody at the end of October. So again, Laura, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll definitely have you back on sometime in the near future. And yeah, everybody stay safe out there. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Everybody stay safe out there. We love everybody, and we will catch you next time. Peace.